inside of you. But just like we had some people who did really well, we also had some people who are in some trouble because they did not submit the exam. We've got 11 people in this class who did not take or submit the exam. I'm not saying you didn't take it. Some of you, I know you at least started it, but you didn't submit it. So that's a problem. So we need you guys to do that. If it is not done by the end of today, it will unfortunately be a 0 in the grade book. So it is in your best interest to make sure that you get that test done today. That way, when I update grades this weekend, you won't have a big 0 holding the rest of your grade back. Remember, this will only be our second formal assignment. Sade, I will give that to you all once we get to that point in the class, but thank you for providing that reminder. As I was saying, remember, this is only our second formal assignment, and it is worth 100 formal points. So it's a big deal in terms of how heavily weighted it is in the grade book. So after I update grades this weekend, you all will see if you took the test, your grade is going to look basically as you expect. If you did not take the test and it's a 0, then you're going to be shocked at how low your grade will be. That doesn't mean it will remain there. That just means that it's there as motivation to get you to do this, to take this test, right? So I need you guys to do this today, and I will provide that information later in the lesson. A couple more things that I wanted to provide as brief class updates. On Monday, today, we will complete missing assignments after I get through a brief lesson with you all. We're going to start Unit 2 really, really briefly. On Monday, we will have one-on-one conferences, and that will be an opportunity for me to meet with you all individually and say, hey, just so you know, you're missing X, Y, and Z assignments. Your grade is blank for right now, and in order for you to improve, I think this is what you should do. So I'm going to give that feedback to each of you, and you'll be able to give me some feedback and say, hey, Mr. Rudd, you move a little bit too fast for me sometimes, or hey, Mr. Rudd, I want to have access to you on Tuesday, so can we set up a standing appointment? Or hey, Mr. Rudd, I hate biology. Whatever you want to say, give me some feedback, and we'll talk through that. So we'll each of us will have 3 to 5 minutes to meet. And while I'm meeting with individual students, everybody else will be working on their missing assignments. Hopefully, we've got a majority of students who are not missing any assignments. But if you are missing some, then you'll have time today to work on them because, of course, all of your Unit 1 assignments are due today. And then if you don't get them done, you will have a late penalty, but you'll have some time to work on them on Monday. And then for my Spanish-speaking students, we will offer a special tutoring session coming soon. And this tutoring session will be led by both teachers and other Spanish-speaking students who took biology in the past. And so these students did quite well in biology, and they will be there as translators for my Spanish-speaking students. So I wanted to make you all aware of that. And I do certainly encourage you to take advantage of that if you are interested. And then lastly, of course, grade books will be updated before class on Monday. That way we can have those one-on-one conferences. So don't be too stressed, but you will see some changes in PowerSchool this weekend. All right, so we're going to briefly introduce Unit 2 today. So in your notes, you should go ahead and start writing down some notes about Unit 2. I'm doing it like this so that we can take Monday. I want to speed up a little bit so that we can take Monday essentially off from content. We'll be having just we'll just be doing those conferences. I won't be introducing any new material on Monday. So that's why we're starting Unit 2 right away. So in this first lesson of Unit 2, we're going to briefly describe the structure and function of eukaryotic organelles. And we will seek to answer the question, why is it important that each organelle has its own unique function? I'm going to hope to be done with this in the next 12 minutes. That way you all have time to do your exams. All right. We'll probably end up covering some of this again. So I'm going to move kind of quickly. So cells. Cells are the smallest living things. They are the smallest unit of life. All cells have the primary purpose of creating proteins. Cells can create thousands of proteins. It just depends on what DNA they have, and it also depends on what genes are activated within that DNA. So we'll talk a lot more about that later in the course, but for now, we just need to know that cells are the smallest living unit, and their primary purpose, their primary function is to create proteins, to make proteins, to synthesize proteins. That's the best scientific word. Cell theory is pretty basic, but what it states is that all living things are made of cells. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things, and new cells can only come from existing cells. So life comes from life, all right? So there used to be a theory that some scientists had in the 19th century that life could arise spontaneously. So basically, if we have some rotten meat, out of that rotten meat, there will be maggots, and those maggots will turn into flies, but they kind of just came out of nowhere. We were able to disprove that, obviously, and we now know that life can only come from other forms of life, except in the very beginning, so it's kind of a contradiction. We also talked about this cell hierarchy. We introduced this in Unit 1. We talked about the fact that atoms, a group of atoms is called a molecule. A group of molecules could be called a macromolecule, so we've skipped some steps here. And then a group of macromolecules could be turned into an organelle, and that's what we're going to focus on today. An organelle literally means a little organ, but it's not a little organ as in a small heart. It's an organelle, it's a little organ that's inside each of your cells. These are structures that perform specific functions inside of a cell. Now, keep in mind, there are trillions of cells inside of our bodies. Trillions of cells that make up who we are. Okay, and each of them has organelles packed inside of it. Okay, I'm not gonna watch this video. We'll come back to that. Skipping that. It's not for you guys. Do you guys remember any organelles from your previous science classes? I know you've probably talked about cells before. Do you remember any of these structures? Can you name any of them?
Ribosomes.
Ribosomes, that's a good one, Kathy. Any others that we can remember?
The nucleus.
Yeah, the nucleus, that's this big blue thing right here. The ribosomes are really small, so they look like dots that are spread throughout the cell. Anything else we can think of?
Cell wall.
Cell wall. I don't know if this cell has a cell wall, but we've got someone, Sade said vacuoles in the group. Those vacuoles would be these smaller blue things. Gloria said vesicles. That's an excellent one as well. We won't talk too much about vesicles in this course, but that's good. And then Jason said red blood cells. Red blood cells are not an organelle. They are a specific type of cell, Jason. But thank you for including that. All right, so let's talk about it. Someone said cell wall. Yeah, Kathy, you said cell wall. So the cell wall is the rigid and most external layer that supports and protects certain cells. Only certain cells have a cell wall. We'll talk more about that next week. Not every cell will have a cell wall, but we do see cell walls in plant cells. So this thick green layer on the outside of the cell is called the cell wall. Here's a microscopic image of plant cells. We can see that they look like kind of chain link fences linked together. The layer that is linking them is the actual cell wall. Okay, so this cell wall it has to be rigid, it's hard, and it provides support and protection for the cell. Again, I'm going to move pretty quickly through this because we'll come back to it. And also, I'm sure you guys remember some of this information. There's also a cell membrane. So the cell wall and the cell membrane are not the same thing. They're similar, but they're not the same. Every cell has a cell membrane. The cell membrane is kind of like the skin of the cell. It keeps everything else in. and it can decide what goes in and out. It regulates what enters and exits the cell. So here's an image of the cell membrane. The cell membrane is made up of lipids, which we learned about in our first unit. But it also has a lot of other things embedded inside of it. We'll talk more about that. But you can see that there's a protein here embedded inside of this cell membrane. There's also a carbohydrate embedded inside of it. But for the most part, the cell membrane is made out of lipids. Okay, skipping that. There's also a nucleus. The nucleus is the control center of eukaryotic cells. So this is where the DNA is located inside of a eukaryotic cell. We'll talk next week about what eukaryotic means, but there are different divisions of cell types, of course. Not all cells are the same. And one of the most basic divisions is the difference between eukaryotic cells and what are called prokaryotic cells. So the DNA inside of a eukaryotic cell, this odd looking word right here, is found inside of a nucleus. Now, again, I told you guys in Unit 1 to be careful and start picking up on some patterns. What we see here is NuClE. NuClE. Does anybody remember where else we've seen those first 5 letters? NuClE.
Nucleic.
Nucleic, yeah, nucleic acids. So I want you all to always associate these things with one another. The nucleus is where we find nucleic acids like DNA. And nucleic acids are made out of nucleotides. So of course, they all start with these same 5 letters. So they need to be associated with one another. Thank you, Kathy. Good. And then Kathy also mentioned ribosomes. So ribosomes are super important because ribosomes, like I said, a cell's primary purpose is to make DNA. I'm sorry, to make proteins. And ribosomes are how proteins are actually made and where they're made. So all cells need ribosomes because all cells need to make proteins. So ribosomes are where proteins are synthesized. Okay. Mitochondria are another important organelle type. Mitochondria is a plural word, so that kind of always trips me up. I just wanted to mention that. Mitochondria is the site, or are the site, of cellular respiration. So this is the process where glucose, sugar, is turned into energy, where carbohydrates get turned into usable energy. We'll talk a lot more about that process. But we always refer to the mighty mitochondria because they are the powerhouse of the cell. They provide the cell with all of its energy, with all of its power. So we obviously need a lot of mitochondria to provide our cells with energy. Plant cells and other organisms that do photosynthesis have what are called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are the location of photosynthesis. And remember, photosynthesis is the process of using light from the sun to create food, to create carbohydrates, otherwise known as glucose. Okay, so we call all organisms that are able to do photosynthesis, we call those organisms autotrophs. So we find chloroplasts only in autotrophic cells. What that means is that our cells do not have chloroplasts. We do not do photosynthesis. That's because we're able to literally eat our own food. We're able to eat food from other sources. We can eat plants and eat other animals. We don't need to create our own food inside of our bodies. Plants are not able to eat, so they need to create their own food. And that's why they do the process of photosynthesis. They rely on chloroplasts to do that. Okay. And then Sade mentioned vacuoles too. That's an interesting one to remember. But vacuoles are really kind of the place of storage in the cell. So the cell is always taking in new things and needing to use them later. So it's got to have somewhere to store them. Cells use vacuoles to do that. The vacuole in a plant cell is larger than the vacuole in an animal cell. Does anybody think they know why that is? Why does the plant cell need a larger vacuole? What is a plant storing? Excellent, Jason. Thank you. Plants need to store water. They need to store a lot of water because for a period of time, a plant might go without water. There's no guarantee that it's going to rain every day in nature. So a plant needs to still have access to water in order to survive. And in some places, like deserts, for very, very long periods of time without any water. They need to have these large vacuoles to store a lot of it. And then this one's always a little bit difficult, I think, for students to understand, but the cytoplasm is basically just the fluid that contains everything else. So like, for example, if we all were to have a pool day and jump inside of the pool, the cytoplasm would be the water that we're swimming around in. So it's not inside of a cell, it's not totally water, but it is mostly water. And it allows for organelles to sometimes move and sometimes stay in place. The cell doesn't want the organelles to move around too much, but they still do need to have some mechanism of moving from one place to the other. So the cytoplasm is thick enough to maintain some amount of regulation so that the organelles don't move too much, but it's also fluid enough to allow them to move from one place to another. So the cytoplasm is just kind of like the fluid, the jelly-like fluid, the background, the medium of the cell. Okay. Okay. Skipping all of this. All right. So we'll stop there. Give me 1 second. Don't pay attention to this. Let me do this. So for those of you who know you need to take this test, let's go ahead and get ready to do that. I'm about to give you the information to do it. Copy, escape. Paste. All right, so for those of you taking the test, it is on SchoolNet, so you'll need to go in through NCED Cloud. The test code is BIO, B-I-O, W-M as in West Mech, U1T as in Unit 1 test. Everyone else should be working on their assignments. Remember, all of your Unit 1 assignments are due tonight at 11:59 p.m. So you've got 12 hours, a little over 12, almost 13 hours to get them done. So Alex, I can see that you just got here. Your name was on the list of students who have not yet taken their exam, so you need to go ahead and do that. Otherwise, it will be a 0 in the grade book today. The directions to do that should be on your screen. I just wanted to make sure you were updated as to what was going on. Okay, folks, it's 11:35 now, so I know a couple of you are still working on your exam. That's fine. You can keep going. As long as you don't hit that 60-minute time limit, you should be fine to keep taking the test. Everybody else, you're good to go, and I hope you have an amazing weekend, and I'll talk to you on Monday. Keep getting that work done. Remember, it's due at 11:59.